What's going on, everyone? This is Political Ideas and Thoughts. And my reason for making this episode, even though I've talked about this a little bit, is because I wanted to put all of this in a video in one place, so that, for somebody who doesn't really feel like going through all of my videos or all of somebody else's videos, so instead of them having to do that, they can just go into this one video that somebody might, share or show them or whatever, or that they may find, and they may understand why this doesn't work. So what am I talking about today? I'm talking about the banning of free speech and the consequences of doing so. So for the past like, I don't even want to say 10 years, but like 6-7 years, this idea of banning free speech, because so-called hate speech is not free speech, has been persisting, has been growing stronger within a lot of movements, and the ACLU has basically sold out. They used to, defend free speech all of the time, even for, unpopular speech, which is really what the idea of free speech is for unpopular speech. But we'll get into that later. But, so they sold out, and they sold out on a lot of things, not just free speech. 2018, when it came to choosing between due process and not due process, for Kavanaugh, they decided for not due process. They decided to just believe the person because, and I'm not saying that the person is lying, but we have a justice system for a reason. We have due process for a reason. And the other thing they did was they supported Harvard's decision to be racist against Asians, because they said that, so basically, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, Harvard made a bunch of decisions that overwhelmingly did not benefit Asians, because they said that Asians were, getting too far ahead. They were doing too well on, entrance tests. So instead of actually instead of trying their best to get the other students, help as much as possible before they get in, they decided to just make sure that the Asians couldn't get in, and they did it in a sort of manipulative, subtle way that it wouldn't really be easy to figure out, but people figured it out. It wasn't that difficult to figure out. And the ACLU defended that, and even though that goes against almost everything that they've talked about, they've pretty much gone against everything they've talked about before. So, what is the purpose of free speech for real? What is the actual purpose? So, the purpose of free speech is to protect unpopular speech. The reason, so a lot of these people want to argue that hate speech is not free speech, and that they do believe in free speech. But they don't actually believe in free speech, because that is not what free speech means. Because free speech isn't there to protect polite speech or, common speech or anything like this. This is why we're not a democracy, but we're a republic for this particular type of reason. Of course, it didn't always work out this way, but that's another subject. But that's the grain of greatness that was part of the republic. So what is free speech for? Well, to really understand this problem, we must look at what happens when you ban certain speech. So what happens when you ban speech? Let's say you have a bunch of white supremacists. And, I don't like white supremacists, but this is what happens when you ban white supremacists. What do they do? They of course find a new platform. Or if they have to, they create their own platform. And so what happens then? They become even more polarized. That's what happens. This is the biggest problem with free speech. They become more polarized because they are now in an echo chamber because society has basically excommunicated them. And I said the word excommunicated for a reason, because most of this comes from these regressive types who don't understand how things work, and they don't really understand that words. I mean, they say that words are violence, which isn't necessarily true, but it isn't necessarily false either, because there can be words that are like violent. I've talked about this in my podcast about nonviolent communication, but to actually equate words with actual violence is itself in some ways limiting, because you're now going to be super triggered when anybody dares to try and find, not even criticize you, but try and show you a different perspective, a different way. And so what happens is these like types, SJW types, these like regressive types, they end up in a bubble, a serious bubble that, when it collapses, when it pops, which it does sometimes, they can't stand it, and it's like they're, it's like severely hurtful or something, and that's not a good way to act. And a lot of this is caused because for some reason a lot of colleges decided to just pander to these people and not have free thought in schools, not have free speech. Now, if you want to argue that some of the free speech is wrong in some ways, and it's not, necessarily done right, I would disagree. I would think that, I would prefer it better if it was more respectful and polite. But you can't stop people from acting a certain way, and doing this doesn't stop them anyways. And to be honest, the regressives themselves act in this way. So what? Do unto others what you don't want done unto you, I guess? I don't know. But so the main problem with this idea of banning free speech is the other side, that was the side that was banned, then becomes polarized. It becomes even more radicalized than they were before. the other thing that happens is what is called reverse psychology, where basically what ends up happening is you have. So say you have, and then this is another problem with this idea as well. So say you have this idea of banning fake news, and like I said, I don't particularly like fake news, but this is what happens. This is the problem with doing this. So somebody sees that it's banned, and they're like, "Wow, I wonder what truths are in this fake news. I wonder why they're so adamant to get rid of this fake news. Maybe it's not fake news at all." And so the completely opposite thing happens. More people become convinced that this thing is actually truthful. So you're not solving the problem. You're not fixing the problem at all. In fact, you're making the problem worse because you're not dealing with things at the root causes of these things. You're just like, oh, let's put a Band-Aid on them. Let's just banish everybody who we don't agree with. Which doesn't solve the problem of radicalizing speech, doesn't solve the problem of white supremacy, doesn't solve the problem of fake news. It just either buries it so it goes underground, which means that more people are going to be interested in it. A really interesting example of this actually happened in 2002, and I can't exactly blame her for this, but so a couple of photos came out of Barbra Streisand's house in 2002, and so she saw this. Maybe her lawyers did or something. And so they decided to try and, suppress these photos. They tried to, get rid of them in some way. And the completely opposite happened because of reverse psychology. Because of the way the mind works. Say, the way to really think about this actually is to think, for me to say, do not think of a white fence. You're going to be thinking about a white fence. It's just the way that the mind works. You're not going to fix the problem by doing this. And a lot of things are done this way. There's a lot of laws that are like, do not do this. And I don't disagree with laws necessarily, but what exactly do you think is going to happen when somebody sees that you can't do something? They're either going to follow the law because they feel like they have to, which doesn't exactly gender a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Understanding of why the law is there. Especially when the law is really dumb, which a lot of laws are. Or, somebody's going to deliberately break it because of reverse psychology. I'm not saying that you must get rid of all the laws, but this is one of the problems with laws. This is definitely one of the problems with banning hate speech. It's definitely one of the problems of banning fake news. There's a big video going around that's trying to be banned by a lot of social media companies. YouTube. And I think it's called Plandemic. And the idea being, that this film is fake news and whatnot. I don't care that it's fake news. I don't like fake news, but because they banned this film, Plandemic, which basically, for those who don't really know, is about how this whole thing has been planned, the coronavirus, and that there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, but that's basically the gist of it. And so it was banned, and so a whole bunch of people found this out and were like, wow, this is really strange. And then they started thinking, well, maybe this film is true. Because sometimes conspiracies can be true. Oftentimes they're not, though, because the conspiracies themselves are usually a little bit too out there. But, they could have a grain of truth. And so a lot of people saw that they banned this film, and then they were like, wow, this is really weird. This must be true. Or this must have some grain of truth that they don't want us to know about or something. It's exactly the opposite thing that they wanted to happen. This is exactly why this is not a good idea. This is why this doesn't work. But let's just put all of that aside for a second. Even if this doesn't convince you at all. Which, to be honest, if it doesn't, you're more concerned about other things that, well, we'll get into that in a second, but let's just say that none of this convinces you at all. None of this matters to you at all. So, what happens? Say somehow you get a law passed or whatever, banning certain hate speech or whatever. What's to say they're not going to go after you? Even if they don't have a law that says this, what's to say that the social media companies won't go after you because they have these ideas that you gave them? This has already happened with a lot of anti-war leftists and progressives that are, not a lot, I suppose, but many of them, because these companies were these companies were given this power by people that don't understand how the psychology works, don't understand that the mind works, and worst of all, don't understand that this can be used against them. Because times change, opinions change, majority opinions will change, and when that happens, what do you think is going to happen to these people? They're not just going to let them stay on the platform. They're going to be like, no, get off the platform. You're hate speech. Another thing that's happened is that a lot of these people have been dealt with as well this way, because a lot of the regressives that have said to do this, a lot of them have been banned as well because of the simple fact that, number one, they're disruptive to the platform itself. But actually, the most logical answer is that they're easier to get rid of. They were, causing most of the problems on the platform. They're the biggest troublemakers, pretty much. And so they said, you know what? You're banned. And they don't seem to understand this problem. And strangest thing is that a lot of them don't seem to, it doesn't seem to be as big a thing as it used to be. I'm sure it's big, but I don't know. I haven't seen as much of it as there used to be. And part of it could be because of this problem. So that's the biggest motivator, I suppose, is the biggest motivator against banning hate speech is to say that what makes you think they're not going to start with you? Oh, you're speaking out against the government? Goodbye. Oh, you're protesting something? Goodbye. They don't care why. They don't care what your political opinions are. Your opinions could be almost as close as theirs. But if you're making waves, they're gonna go after you because they don't because they're out to make a profit. They're not out of here to be moralize to people. I mean, they do both sometimes, but it's mostly for profit. It's a profit company. And you don't think this is going to be used against you? Come on now. Think for a second. So, that's my point of view. There's my reasons for why you shouldn't ban hate speech, and why, in fact, this will be used against those who want it, and have been used against those who want it. I'm not saying all of them, but many of them. The most disruptive of them. So yeah, you kind of reap what you sow on this one, I guess. But they don't understand what reverse psychology is, I guess, and so they fall into this trap of, oh, we have to ban hate speech, and that's not how you deal with a problem like this. To be honest, I don't know exactly how you deal with a problem like this. Maybe you do what Joe Rogan did with Alex Jones. I don't think he did it necessarily to spite Alex Jones, but he showed how silly Alex Jones can be. That's how you deal with a problem like this. You don't just ban them and expect them to go away. That doesn't work. It never worked. And even if it did work, which it can sometimes work, but even if it did work, I'm almost certain that you're going to be part of this blanket ban, I suppose, is what I'm going to call it, because once they've gotten these powers, they use them powers to do whatever, because you told them to, and you're going to be the first to go. A lot of them are the first to go. So yeah, that was really, really unwise. And some people want to say that as regards to people being mean as well, but the problem with that is that you don't solve the problem of meanness by banning it. You're just going to radicalize those people even further. How do you solve this problem? I don't know, but you don't solve it this way. It doesn't work. Never worked. So, if you like this video, if you dislike this video, leave me a comment letting me know why. And I'll talk to you in the next episode.